15 stitches. The long tail cast on counts as your first row of knitting. So if you used a different type of cast on, then knit the first row. So we're moving on to the second row, which is a purl row, except for the first and last stitches. The first stitch of the purl row we're going to slip, and then we're going to purl the rest of the stitches. As you get to the end of row 2, we're not going to purl the last stitch. So when you get down to the last stitch, knit the last stitch and turn for row 3. Now again, this is a knit row. First thing we're going to do is slip the first stitch. We're going to move our working yarn to the back and then knit the rest of the third row. Now I've got 3 rows worked in stocking knit. The next 3 rows are worked in reverse stocking knit. So what you end up doing is turning and working row 4 as a knit row, and then a purl row, and then a knit row. So the knit row starts with slipping the first stitch, moving the yarn to the back, row 6, slip the first stitch, purl the rest of the row except for the last stitch, knit the last stitch. Row 6, slip the first stitch, move your yarn to the back, and knit the rest of the row. Now, I've completed 3 rows in stocking knit stitch, and then these 3 rows will be reverse stocking knit stitch, which start to make the elastic fabric of our mitten. So 3 rows of stocking knit, 3 rows of reverse stocking knit, and then you repeat rows 4, 5, and 6. So you go back to the knit row, purl row, knit row again until you get a gap big enough to fit halfway around your thumb. Now for me, I found this to be 12 rows, which is 2 rows of stocking knit, or 2 rows of the stocking knit pattern and 2 rows of the reverse stocking knit. Well, all I've made so far is this part of your mitten. It's going to go around your hand, and this is going to be your edge of your thumb hole. So now I need to cast on the rest of the stitches on the needle. Now, what I've found is if your tail and your working yarn are on opposite sides of your fabric here, then you need to cast on your stitches to the opposite needle. Now, here's one that I'm working in soft weight yarn on size 3 needles, and I needed to do 15 rows. My tail and my working yarn ended up on the same side. So I've cut the threads here. So this is disconnected from my ball of yarn, and I'm going to cast on the rest of the stitches on this needle. I'll show you what that looks like here in just a second. Okay, here on my worsted weight mitten, I've got my section that I did with the 15 stitches wide, and again my working yarn and my tail are on opposite sides, so I cast on what's going to be the part of the mitten that goes down my hand and up my wrist on the opposite needle. Now I'm going to go ahead and work the same pattern that I was over here, slipping the first stitch of each row, knitting, this counts as my first knitted row, purling except for the last stitch, which you knit and then purl, and then just doing that repeat, knit, purl, knit, knit, purl, knit. until you get the same amount of rows as you started on this section. Now see, these are separated, and although I'm going to be using these 2 needles, I'm just going to squish this off to the side and ignore it while I catch this part up. Now, here on my sock weight yarn, I have my section that goes above my thumb, sitting there. Now, I would recommend doing 20 stitches in the sock weight yarn instead of 15. I only did 15 on these. I'll show you my prototype that's done, and I find this is a little bit short. I wish it came more up to my knuckle. So 15 stitches leaves you right at the base of your fingers, and I just have average size adult hands, so adjust the number of casts on depending on if you want it to come a lot further up your wrist and cast more stitches on the second part. Now, because this first part, my tail and my working yarn ended up on the same side, I cast 40 stitches on the same needle. Now, I'm just going to scooch this out of the way because I'm not knitting into this, and this is detached from my ball of yarn, and I'm just going to work this section until it's caught up and is the same length as this section.